Captain Jake Morrison stared at the view screen as the alien ship approached. After 300 years of dreaming about this moment, humanity was finally meeting another intelligent species. The sleek vessel moved with purpose through space, its hull gleaming with an otherworldly blue light. "Contact established, Captain," reported Commander Lisa Barnes from her station. "They're responding to our greeting protocols." Jake felt his heart racing. As commander of the exploration vessel New Horizons, he carried the hopes of 30 billion humans on his shoulders. Earth had sent their best and brightest on this mission, equipped with humanity's most advanced technology. The alien ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of their vessel. Its design was elegant, curved and flowing like something grown rather than built. Jake had to admit it was beautiful in a way that human ships, with their angular efficiency, could never match. "Translation systems are working," Lisa continued. "The universal translator is picking up their language patterns. They call themselves the Vextai." Dr. Alex Carter looked up from his biological scanner. The xenobiologist had been quiet since they first detected the alien vessel, running constant scans and taking readings. Something about his expression made Jake uneasy. "Captain, I'm getting some strange readings from their ship," Alex said carefully. "The biological signatures are unusual." Before Jake could respond, the main screen flickered to life. The alien that appeared was humanoid, but clearly not human. Its skin had a slight gray tint, and its eyes were larger than human eyes with no visible pupils. When it spoke, the translator rendered its words in perfect English. "Greetings, humans of Earth. I am Ambassador Zethkar of the Vextai Empire. We welcome you to the greater galaxy." Jake stepped forward, trying to project confidence despite his nervousness. "Ambassador, I'm Captain Jake Morrison. We're honored to make contact with your people." The alien's face shifted into what might have been a smile. "The honor is ours, Captain. Your species shows great promise. We have been watching your development with interest." Over the following days, the Vextai proved to be gracious hosts. They invited human representatives aboard their ship, sharing stories of the Galactic Confederation, a peaceful alliance of dozens of intelligent species. They spoke of trade opportunities, shared knowledge, and protection from the dangers of space. "There are hostile species out there," Zethkar explained during one of their meetings. "Pirates, warlike races, cosmic threats. The Confederation offers safety to its members." Lisa was fascinated by their technology. The Vextai showed them energy systems that seemed impossible, medical advances that could cure diseases humanity had fought for centuries, and terraforming techniques that could turn dead worlds into gardens. "They're offering us membership," she told Jake privately after their 3rd day of talks. "Full partnership in the Confederation. They want to help us establish colonies on 12 different worlds." Jake should have felt excited, but Alex's continued worry was infectious. The scientist had been running scans constantly, and his reports were troubling. "Captain, there's something wrong with their biological data," Alex said during their private briefing. "When they scan us, they're not just looking at our basic physiology. They're mapping our neural patterns, our genetic structure, our psychological responses. It's far more detailed than any medical scan should be." "Maybe their medicine is just more advanced," Lisa suggested. "They did show us those incredible healing technologies." Alex shook his head. "This isn't medical scanning. This is cataloging. They're creating detailed blueprints of human biology and psychology." "But why?" Jake decided to investigate. During their next meeting with Zethkar, he carefully brought up the scans. The ambassador's response was smooth. Perhaps too smooth. "We must understand your biology to ensure compatibility with Confederation medical systems," Zethkar explained. "Some species have negative reactions to our standard treatments. We want to ensure your safety." It sounded reasonable, but something in the alien's tone made Jake's skin crawl. That night, he authorized Alex to run a covert scan of the Vextai ship. What they found changed everything. "Captain, you need to see this," Alex called urgently from his lab. His face was pale as he brought up his readings on the main display. The screen showed a cross-section of the Vextai vessel. Deep in its core were chambers filled with biological material, organic matter that didn't match Vextai physiology. As Alex adjusted the sensors, more details became clear. "Those are holding cells," Alex whispered. "And those biological readings?" "Captain, there are other species in there. Living beings from at least 6 different evolutionary backgrounds." Jake felt ice form in his stomach. "Show me more." Alex's fingers flew over his controls. The deeper they scanned, the more horrible the truth became. The Vextai ship wasn't just a diplomatic vessel. It was a mobile laboratory. The aliens weren't studying other species to help them. They were harvesting them. "The 12 worlds they offered us," Alex said, his voice barely audible. I cross-referenced their locations with our stellar maps. "Captain, those aren't colonial sites. They're collection points." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The Vextai weren't offering humanity membership in a peaceful confederation. They were offering humanity the same fate as the creatures in those holding cells. To be studied, cataloged, and ultimately consumed. Jake's mind raced. How long did they have before the Vextai made their move? Were there already human colonies being established on those 12 worlds? Had the trap already been sprung? "Get me a secure channel to Earth," Jake ordered. "Emergency protocols. We need to warn them now." But even as he spoke, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. On the view screen, the Vextai vessel was powering up weapon systems that moments before had been hidden. More ships were emerging from hyperspace, dozens of them surrounding the new horizons. Zethkar's face appeared on their screen again, but this time, there was no pretense of friendship. His expression was cold, calculating. "Captain Morrison, please power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Your species has been selected for integration into our empire. Resistance will only cause unnecessary suffering." Jake looked around at his crew. Lisa's face was a mask of betrayal and rage. Alex was frantically trying to send a warning signal to Earth. The rest of his officers were looking to him for orders. The Vextai had made one critical mistake in their perfect trap. They had assumed that humans, like apparently every other species they had encountered, would surrender when faced with superior force. They had assumed that humanity would accept defeat gracefully. They were about to learn that humans were different. Very different. "All hands battle stations," Jake announced calmly. "Activate emergency protocols. If we're going down, we're taking as many of these things with us as possible." The war between humanity and the Vextai Empire had begun. Neither species yet understood what they had unleashed. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the war room deep beneath the Earth's surface, watching the holographic display show humanity's dying colonies. Red dots marked where human settlements had gone dark. 12 worlds, just as Alex Carter had warned before his ship was destroyed. Billions of humans were gone, taken by the Vextai in a coordinated strike that proved their trap had been years in the making. "How many survivors?" Kate asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Less than 1 million across all 12 worlds," reported Colonel Danny Pierce. His scarred face showed no emotion, but Kate could see the rage burning in his eyes. "The Vextai didn't kill them cleanly. Our deep space monitors picked up transmissions before the colonies went dark. They're keeping our people alive, studying them." Kate closed her eyes briefly. The reports from the few escape pods that had made it back to Earth told stories of horror. The Vextai weren't just harvesting humans for biological material. They were experimenting with human psychology, testing pain thresholds and mapping emotional responses. They treated humans like lab rats. "The Vextai fleet will reach Earth in 6 months, announced Dr. Ryan Mitchell as he entered the room. The head of the Prometheus Research Division looked tired but determined. "They're taking their time, probably processing their captures from the colonies." Kate had known Ryan for 20 years. They had served together in the Outer Rim conflicts back when humanity's biggest worry was pirates and resource disputes. Now they faced something far worse. An enemy that saw them as nothing more than interesting specimens. "Show me what you have, Ryan," Kate said. Ryan activated a secure hologram. Files appeared in the air around them, each marked with the highest classification levels. Kate recognized some of the project names. Things that had been developed but never deployed. Weapons and strategies that had been deemed too dangerous even for war. "Project Dark Genesis," Ryan began. "Everything we developed but never used because we thought it was too cruel, too extreme. The Vextai just changed the rules of engagement. The first file showed biological weapons unlike anything humanity had deployed before. These weren't simple viruses or toxins. They were self-modifying organisms that could learn from their targets, adapting and evolving in real time. They could turn an enemy's own biology into a weapon against them. The nanoplague, Ryan explained. Once released, it studies its target species and rebuilds itself to exploit their specific biological weaknesses. It doesn't just kill, it learns how to kill better. Kate felt sick looking at the projections, but she forced herself to continue. The second file was worse. Psychological warfare systems, Ryan continued. We can broadcast signals that target specific brain chemistry. We can make entire populations paranoid, suicidal, or completely psychotic. We can make them turn on each other. Danny looked up from the files. These are war crimes waiting to happen. War crimes assume the enemy recognizes the concept of war, Kate replied coldly. The Vextai don't see this as war. They see it as harvesting. They don't consider us people. The third file made Kate's blood run cold. It was labeled Reaper Protocol and contained specifications for combat armor that bonded directly with human nervous systems. Soldiers wearing Reaper armor became something beyond human. Their capacity for mercy, fear, and hesitation was chemically suppressed while their aggression and pain tolerance were amplified to impossible levels. The psychological cost of using Reaper armor is severe, Ryan warned. Test subjects showed permanent personality changes. They became focused entirely on killing, with little regard for anything else. How severe? Kate asked. 90% of test subjects had to be terminated after extended use. They couldn't function in civilian society. They saw every interaction as a potential combat situation. Kate studied the data. The armor would make human soldiers unstoppable in combat, but at the cost of their humanity. It was exactly the kind of weapon that military ethics had banned decades ago. There's more, Ryan said quietly. He opened the final file labeled Mirror Protocol. Dr. Amy Rodriguez appeared on the hologram. Kate recognized her. One of humanity's most brilliant engineers known for her work on adaptive technology systems. The Mirror Protocol is different, Amy's recorded image explained. Instead of creating new weapons, we corrupt existing enemy technology. Every piece of Vextai equipment becomes a potential weapon against them. Their own ships, their communication systems, their life support, everything becomes unstable. How does it work? Kate asked. We introduce adaptive code viruses into their systems. The viruses learn how their technology functions, then begin making small changes. A navigation system starts giving wrong coordinates. Life support begins mixing toxins into the air supply. Weapons start targeting their own ships. Kate could see the potential. The Vextai relied heavily on their technological superiority. If that technology could be turned against them, their advantage would become their weakness. What's the timeline for deployment? She asked. Everything is ready, Ryan said. We've been developing these systems for decades, just in case. The question isn't whether we can deploy them. The question is whether we should. Kate looked around the room at her officers. These were good people, trained to fight with honor and protect civilian populations. What she was about to authorize would change that forever. The Vextai made their choice when they decided to treat humanity like animals, she said finally. They want to study our biology and psychology? Let's give them something to study. Danny straightened. Orders, Admiral? Authorize Project Dark Genesis. Full deployment. I want every weapon, every strategy, every piece of forbidden technology activated and ready for combat. Ma'am, Amy spoke up from her position at the technical station. Once we cross this line, there's no going back. These weapons will change how humanity fights forever. Kate nodded grimly. The Vextai already changed us forever when they started harvesting our people. We're just returning the favor. Over the following weeks, humanity transformed itself. Factories that had been producing civilian goods were converted to manufacture nano-weapons and Reaper armor. Research stations began developing new psychological warfare techniques. Ships were retrofitted with Mirror Protocol systems. The volunteers for the Reaper program knew what they were signing up for. They knew that wearing the armor would likely cost them their humanity. They volunteered anyway. Kate watched the first Reaper squad complete their training. The soldiers moved with inhuman precision and showed no emotional response to simulated combat scenarios that would traumatize normal troops. They had become living weapons, focused entirely on destroying their enemies. The transformation is complete, the lead technician reported. Neural suppression is holding steady. Aggression enhancement is functioning normally. They're ready for deployment. Kate looked at the soldiers through the observation window. Days ago, they had been normal people with families and hopes for the future. Now they were something else entirely. Instruments of war shaped by humanity's darkest impulses. Sir, incoming transmission from the Vextai fleet. Communications reported. They're demanding our surrender, Kate smiled coldly. Put them through. Sethkar's face appeared on the main screen. The alien ambassador looked confident, even smug. Admiral Sullivan, our fleet approaches your world. Surrender now and your species will be treated well during the integration process. Integration? Kate laughed. Is that what you call it? We know what you really do to the species you integrate. Your resistance is futile, Zethkar replied. We have encountered hundreds of species. They all surrender eventually when they realize the futility of fighting superior technology. Kate's smile grew wider. You're right about one thing, Ambassador. You are about to encounter something you've never seen before, but it's not surrender. She cut the transmission and turned to her staff. Launch the first wave. Let's show them what humans are really capable of. Captain Steve Hamilton watched through his ship's sensors as the Vextai fleet formation dissolved into chaos. What had been an organized armada just hours before was now a scattered collection of ships firing randomly at each other. The mirror protocol was working better than anyone had expected. Sir, we're picking up distress signals from 17 Vextai vessels, reported his communications officer. Their own navigation systems are steering them into asteroid fields. Their weapons are targeting their support ships. Steve felt no satisfaction watching the destruction. 3 months into humanity's counterattack, he had seen too much to feel anything resembling joy. The humans were winning, but the cost of victory was becoming clear. Any word from the Reaper squads? He asked. They've secured the research station on Kepler 442, came the reply. Complete neutralization of enemy forces. No survivors, no survivors. That phrase had become common in human military reports. The Reaper soldiers didn't take prisoners anymore. Steve wasn't even sure they remembered how. He thought about Lieutenant Ben Clark, who had been one of the first volunteers for the Reaper program. Before the transformation, Ben had been a gentle person who sent letters to his sister every week and kept pictures of his nephew in his locker. Now Ben led what the military called cultural extinction units, specialized teams that didn't just destroy enemy bases, but erased all evidence that the enemy had ever existed there. Dr. Nicole Turner entered the bridge, carrying a datapad filled with psychological warfare reports. Nicole had been a peace activist before the war, someone who believed conflicts could be resolved through understanding and compromise. The war had changed her like it had changed everyone. The latest PsyOps results, she said, handing Steve the pad. The corruption doctrine is exceeding all projections. Steve read the report with growing unease. The corruption doctrine was humanity's systematic attack on Vextai psychology. Human teams were using captured Vextai to understand their social structures, their fears, their concepts of identity and belonging. Then they weaponized that information. We're not just fighting their military, Nicole explained. We're attacking their ability to think of themselves as a unified species. We're making them forget who they are. The reports described Vextai prisoners who had been exposed to human psychological techniques. Within days, they began turning on their own kind. They started to believe that other Vextai were imposters, that their own memories were false, that their species' history was a lie. The captured Vextai from Sector 7 have completely lost their sense of identity, Nicole continued. They can't remember their names, their families, or even what their homeworld looks like. They're beginning to see other Vextai as enemies. Steve set down the pad. This isn't warfare anymore. This is something else. The Vextai started it, Nicole replied, but her voice lacked conviction. They were harvesting our people. They were studying us like animals. That was the justification everyone used now. The Vextai had treated humans like lab rats, so humanity had abandoned every rule of civilized warfare in response. The problem was that humanity had become very good at being uncivilized. Lieutenant Sarah Kim appeared on the bridge, returning from a reconnaissance mission. Sarah had been one of the few officers to serve since the beginning of the war, and the changes in her were obvious. She moved differently now, spoke differently. She was still human, but barely. Report from the Vextai prison worlds, she said mechanically. The nanoplague has spread to their civilian populations. Estimated casualties are in the billions. The nanoplague had been designed to target military installations, but like everything else humanity had created, it had evolved beyond its original purpose. The self-modifying organisms had learned to attack Vextai biology in ways that the original designers never intended. The plague is targeting their reproductive systems now, Sarah continued without emotion. It's not just killing them. It's making it impossible for them to have children. They're going extinct. Steve felt his stomach turn. Genocide was a word that no one used in official reports, but that's what this was becoming. Humanity wasn't just defeating the Vextai. They were erasing them from existence. There's more, Sarah said. She activated a holographic display showing battle reports from across known space. Other species are watching our conflict. They're taking sides. The display showed a galaxy in turmoil. Species that had been neutral in the human-Vextai conflict were now choosing sides not based on ideology, but based on fear. Some were allying with humanity out of terror of what would happen if they opposed them. Others were desperately trying to ally with the Vextai to stop humanity's spread. The Zephyrians have officially declared war on humanity, Sarah reported. They've formed a coalition with 12 other species. They're calling it the Containment Alliance. Steve wasn't surprised. Humanity's new methods of warfare had horrified other galactic civilizations. They had seen what humans could do when they abandoned moral constraints, and they were terrified that they might be next. Intelligence reports suggest that the coalition isn't trying to help the Vextai win, Nicole added. They're trying to make sure that both humans and Vextai destroy each other completely. The irony wasn't lost on Steve. Humanity had become so effective at warfare that other species now saw them as a greater threat than the Vextai. The galaxy's response wasn't to help either side win, it was to hope that both sides would lose. Admiral Sullivan wants a status report on Project Omega, Sarah said, consulting her datapad. Steve had heard whispers about Project Omega, but had hoped the rumors weren't true. What's the current status? Dr. Amy Rodriguez has completed the theoretical framework, Sarah replied. General Peter Adams is requesting volunteers for field testing. Project Omega was humanity's response to the growing coalition against them. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a fundamental attack on the nature of reality itself. The project involved technologies that could affect space-time, causality, and the basic laws of physics. They want to test weapons that attack reality? Steve asked. The Vextai have deployed similar technology, Nicole explained. Their latest ships are using weapons that don't just destroy matter. They destroy the possibility that matter ever existed. They're editing history itself. Steve realized that the war had escalated beyond anything resembling conventional conflict. Both sides were now deploying weapons that operated outside normal physics. They weren't just fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for the right to exist in reality itself. A new alarm sounded on the bridge. Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the Vextai fleet, the sensor operator reported. They're charging some kind of weapon we've never seen before. Steve looked at the display. The surviving Vextai ships were focusing all their power into a single point in space. The energy readings were beyond anything in human experience. It's a reality bomb, Nicole whispered. They're going to try to erase this entire star system from existence. Steve understood now why Admiral Sullivan had authorized Project Omega. The war had moved beyond conventional weapons, beyond biological warfare, beyond psychological attacks. Both species were now fighting with the fundamental forces of existence itself. Send a message to Earth, Steve ordered. Tell them to activate Omega immediately. If the Vextai want to play with reality, let's show them what humans can do with it. As his communications officer sent the message, Steve wondered if humanity would recognize itself when this war was over. They had started as explorers seeking peaceful contact with alien life. Now they were becoming something that attacked the very nature of existence itself. The war was no longer about survival. It had become about deciding what form of reality would remain when the fighting stopped. Admiral Carl Thompson stood in what used to be called the Strategic Command Center, though the name no longer fit. The room around him defied normal physics. Walls that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, holographic displays showing battles that were happening in the past and future at the same time, and tactical officers whose minds had been modified to process impossible amounts of data. The war between humanity and the Vextai had broken reality in 17 different star systems. Space-time itself had become unstable, creating zones where cause and effect worked backwards, where matter could exist and not exist simultaneously, and where the laws of physics were more like suggestions. Status report on the Omega deployment, Carl said to his chief science officer. Dr. Emma Wright. Emma had been studying war psychology for 20 years, but the conflict with the Vextai had forced her to expand her research into areas that didn't have names yet. She was now humanity's leading expert on what she called ontological warfare, fighting that attacked the very concept of existence. The Omega weapons are functioning beyond our projections. Emma reported, though her voice carried no satisfaction. We've successfully erased 3 Vextai fleet groups from history. They didn't just die, they never existed. We've removed them from the timeline itself. Carl nodded grimly. Project Omega had started as a desperate response to Vextai reality weapons, but it had quickly evolved into something far more sophisticated. Humanity had learned to weaponize concepts like identity, memory, and existence itself. The psychological impact on our own forces? Carl asked. Emma's expression darkened. Severe. When soldiers use Omega weapons, they're not just killing enemies. They're erasing their own memories of those enemies. Many of our troops are starting to forget why they're fighting. Some don't remember that there was ever a war. The reports from the front lines painted a disturbing picture. Human soldiers equipped with Omega technology were becoming unstuck from normal causality. They would remember battles that hadn't happened yet, forget battles they had just fought, and sometimes attack allies they no longer recognized. General Peter Adams entered the command center, his face bearing the scars of exposure to temporal weapons. Half of Peter's body existed slightly out of phase with normal reality, a side effect of commanding troops armed with causality-disrupting technology. The Vextai have escalated again, Peter announced. They've deployed weapons that attack the concept of hope itself. Entire human colonies are falling into despair so complete that they're voluntarily surrendering to death. Carl felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The Vextai had apparently learned from humanity's psychological warfare techniques and improved upon them. They weren't just attacking human minds. They were attacking the fundamental emotions that made life worth living. How are our people responding? Carl asked. Dr. Rodriguez has developed countermeasures, Peter replied. We're deploying weapons that attack the Vextai concept of self-preservation. We're making them want to die. Carl realized that both species had now transcended every traditional boundary of warfare. They weren't just fighting over territory or resources. They were fighting over the right to experience emotions, to have hope, to want to continue existing. Sir, incoming transmission from the Galactic Coalition, announced the communications officer. Carl had been expecting this. The coalition of alien species that had formed to contain both humans and Vextai had been growing stronger as the war became more terrifying. They had seen what both species were capable of and had decided that neither could be allowed to survive. The holographic display activated, showing representatives from dozens of alien civilizations. Carl recognized some of them, species that had been exploring space for thousands of years, ancient civilizations with wisdom spanning millennia. Now they all looked terrified. Admiral Thompson, spoke the coalition's leader, a being called Kethren whose species had achieved interstellar travel before humans had discovered fire. We are formally demanding that both humanity and the Vextai Empire cease all military activities immediately. And if we refuse? Carl asked, though he already knew the answer. Then the coalition will be forced to sterilize both your species, Kethren replied without emotion. What you have become threatens the stability of reality itself. We cannot allow this conflict to continue. Carl understood their fear. The weapons being deployed by both humans and Vextai were affecting space-time across multiple sectors. Some areas of the galaxy were becoming uninhabitable not because of destruction, but because the fundamental concepts of life and death had become meaningless there. The Vextai started this, Carl said. They treated us like animals to be harvested. And in response you became something worse than animals. Kethren replied coldly. You became a species that makes reality itself unstable. Do you understand what you've done? The coalition representative activated a galactic map, showing the areas affected by the human-Vextai conflict. Carl was shocked by what he saw. Entire sectors of space were marked in red, indicating regions where normal physics no longer applied. Some areas were marked in black, indicating zones where the concept of existence itself had become uncertain. You've created wounds in reality, Kethren continued. Some may never heal. There are star systems where time flows backwards, where matter spontaneously ceases to exist, where consciousness itself becomes impossible. Carl looked at his officers. Emma was studying the data with growing horror. Peter was examining tactical projections that showed how the reality damage was spreading. Even his modified mind was struggling to process the implications. How long do we have? Carl asked. The Coalition fleet will arrive in this system in 72 hours, Kethran announced. You have until then to surrender unconditionally. If you refuse, we will deploy weapons that will ensure neither humans nor Vextai can ever threaten reality again. The transmission ended, leaving Carl alone with his staff and the weight of an impossible decision. Surrender meant the extinction of humanity as an independent species, but continuing the war might mean the extinction of reality itself. Options? Carl asked. Emma spoke first. We could try to negotiate with the Vextai. End the war before the Coalition arrives. Peter shook his head. The Vextai are beyond negotiation. They've modified themselves so extensively that they may not even remember what peace means. They've become something that exists only to fight. What about our own people? Carl asked. Could we control the reality weapons, limit their effects? It's too late for that, Emma replied. Our soldiers have been exposed to these weapons for months. Many of them have been fundamentally changed by the experience. They're not fully human anymore, and they're not capable of stopping. Carl realized the horrible truth. Humanity had won every battle against the Vextai, but in doing so, they had become something that the rest of the galaxy found more terrifying than their original enemy. They had achieved total military superiority at the cost of their own sanity and the stability of reality itself. There is one option, Emma said quietly. The final Omega Protocol. We could erase the entire conflict from history. Make it so the war never happened. What would be the cost? Carl asked. Emma's expression was haunted. Everything. To erase a war this extensive from the timeline, we would have to erase most of human and Vextai civilization. Both species would be reduced to primitive states. Billions of people would never be born. Entire cultures would vanish. Carl looked around the command center at officers whose minds had been modified to handle impossible realities, at tactical displays showing battles across multiple timelines, at weapons that could edit history itself. Humanity had achieved the ultimate victory. They had become capable of defeating any enemy by attacking the very concept of existence. But in doing so, they had also become something that even they no longer recognized. Prepare the final Omega Protocol, Carl ordered. If we're going to end this war, let's end it completely. Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge of humanity's last operational starship, watching reality tear itself apart around her. The final battle between humans and Vextai had moved beyond anything that could be called warfare. Both species were now deploying weapons that attacked the fundamental structure of existence itself. Through the viewscreen, she could see Vextai ships that existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously, their hulls shifting between states of matter that had no names. Human vessels responded with weapons that erased their targets not just from space, but from the possibility of ever having existed. Final Omega Protocol is ready for deployment, reported Dr. Chris Nelson from his station. Chris had been studying the war's effects on reality itself, documenting how the conflict had fundamentally altered the nature of existence in affected regions. Maria looked at the tactical display. The battle was no longer about victory or defeat. Both species had transcended those concepts. Humans and Vextai were now fighting to determine which version of reality would continue to exist when the conflict ended. Status of the Vextai reality bomb? She asked. Charging at 90%, replied her tactical officer. If they complete the sequence, they'll erase this entire sector of the galaxy from the timeline. Not destroy it. Make it so it never existed. Maria nodded grimly. The Vextai had learned to use humanity's own temporal weapons against them, but with typically alien efficiency. Where humans used reality weapons as tools of war, the Vextai had made them into instruments of absolute erasure. Commander Tracy Lewis entered the bridge carrying reports from across the galaxy. Tracy was one of the few officers tasked with documenting what humanity had become during the war. Her reports would serve as both historical record and warning for whatever came after. The Coalition fleet has engaged our outer defenses, Tracy announced. They're not trying to defeat us. They're trying to contain the reality damage we've caused. The Galactic Coalition had finally acted on their threats. Faced with two species whose conflict was damaging the fundamental structure of existence, they had deployed everything they had to ensure that neither humans nor Vextai survived. What's their strategy? Maria asked. Temporal isolation, Tracy replied. They're trying to cut off this entire region of space-time from the rest of the galaxy. If they succeed, our war will continue, but it won't affect the rest of reality. Maria understood the coalition's logic. They couldn't stop the human-Vex-TIE conflict, but they could prevent it from spreading. They were essentially quarantining both species, leaving them to destroy each other in isolation. Time to coalition containment? Maria asked. 6 hours, Chris reported. After that, we'll be cut off from the rest of the galaxy permanently. Maria looked around her bridge at officers who had been fundamentally changed by exposure to reality-altering weapons. Their minds had been modified to process impossible concepts. Their bodies partially existed outside normal space-time, and their souls, if such things still existed, had been warped by wielding weapons that could edit history itself. Orders from Admiral Thompson? She asked. Tracy's expression was grim. Deploy the final Omega Protocol. Complete temporal erasure of the conflict. Make it so the war never happened. Maria felt a chill that transcended physical sensation. The final Omega Protocol was humanity's ultimate weapon, a device that could erase events from history so completely that even the memory of them would vanish. It was the logical endpoint of everything humanity had developed since the war began. What would be the extent of the erasure? Maria asked. Chris consulted his calculations. To completely remove this conflict from history, we would need to erase approximately 400 years of human and Vex-TIE development. Both species would be reduced to pre-spaceflight civilizations. The memories of everyone involved would be deleted. The war, the weapons, the reality damage, all of it would simply never have happened. Including us, Tracy added quietly. Everyone on this ship, everyone who fought in this war, everyone who was born because of events leading to this conflict, we would all be erased from existence. Maria understood the full cost now. To save reality from the damage caused by their war, humanity would have to erase their own existence as a spacefaring civilization. They would be reduced to a primitive state, unaware that they had ever reached the stars. The Vex-TIE are preparing their own final protocol, Chris reported. If they deploy it first, they'll erase humanity from history entirely while preserving themselves as the dominant species. Maria realized that both species had reached the same conclusion. The only way to end the war was to ensure that their enemy had never existed. But both sides had the power to implement this solution, which meant that whoever acted first would determine which species survived. Time to Vex-TIE deployment? She asked. 11 minutes, Chris replied. Maria looked at the final Omega device on her tactical display. It was a small thing, barely larger than a human fist, but it contained the power to rewrite history itself. Activating it would save the galaxy from the reality damage caused by the war, but at the cost of erasing most of human civilization from existence. Ma'am, Tracy said softly, there's something else you should know. Intelligence reports suggest that other species have been studying our conflict. They're learning from our weapons, our strategies, our innovations. What do you mean? Maria asked. They're adopting human methods of warfare, not because they want to, but because conventional weapons have become obsolete in the face of what we've created. We've fundamentally changed the nature of conflict itself. Maria felt a horrible understanding dawn. Even if the final Omega Protocol erased the current war from history, the knowledge of these weapons would remain with other species. Humanity had introduced concepts of warfare so advanced that other civilizations were being forced to adopt them just to survive. The galaxy will never be the same, Tracy continued. Even if we erase ourselves from history, we've already changed how every other species thinks about war, about conflict, about the limits of what's possible. Maria realized the final, terrible irony. Humanity's war with the Vex-TIE had been intended to preserve their species from extinction. Instead, it had introduced forms of warfare so advanced that they would spread throughout the galaxy like a virus, making every future conflict exponentially more destructive. Deploy the final Omega Protocol, Maria ordered. If we're going to end this, let's end it completely. As Chris began the activation sequence, Maria thought about humanity's journey from first contact to this moment. They had started as explorers seeking peaceful relationships with alien life. They had encountered a species that saw them as nothing more than animals to be harvested. In response, they had become something far worse than animals. They had become a species that could attack existence itself. Protocol activated, Chris announced. Temporal erasure beginning in 60 seconds. Maria looked around her bridge one last time. In less than a minute, none of this would have ever happened. The war, the weapons, the reality damage, all of it would be erased from history. Humanity would be reduced to a pre-spaceflight civilization, unaware that they had ever reached the stars. But somewhere in the galaxy, other species would remember. They would remember that a species called humanity had once existed, had once fought a war so terrible that it threatened reality itself, and had finally chosen to erase themselves rather than continue the conflict. 30 seconds to erasure, Chris reported. Maria smiled grimly. Humanity's final victory would be to ensure that their enemy never existed, even at the cost of their own existence. It was, she realized, the most human solution possible, to solve an impossible problem by making it so the problem had never existed in the first place. 10 seconds, Chris announced. As the countdown reached 0, Maria had one final thought. The galaxy would be safer without humanity, but it would also be a little less innovative, a little less willing to push boundaries, a little less human. Perhaps that was for the best. The final Omega Protocol activated, and Captain Maria Santos, the war between humanity and the Vextai Empire, and 400 years of human spacefaring civilization simply ceased to have ever existed. But across the galaxy, other species continued their study of human warfare techniques, ensuring that humanity's legacy of innovative destruction would live on long after humanity itself had been erased from history. The war was over. Humanity had won by choosing not to exist, and the galaxy would never be quite the same.